Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this EPC Policy Dialogue, which is going to be doing a deep dive into the outcome of Moldova's recent elections. I have to say that I personally felt very happy this morning when I woke up and saw this result. I think everybody in the country is probably feeling the same, maybe a sense of relief that it went that way. So we're going to be really having a good deep dive into the different elements of the election, the winners, the losers, those in between, and what we can expect next, including vis-a-vis Moldova's EU accession process. And we have with us today two great experts to share their insights. First of all, Anastasia Pociumban, I hope I did not pronounce that too badly, who is a research fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations, otherwise known as DGAP, and Ionela Maria Ciolan, who's research officer at the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies here in Brussels. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining us. To the audience, as usual, you will be able to put your questions into the Q&A box or by clicking on the hand icon to say them verbally. We always like to hear real voices in these discussions. I want to start off by asking perhaps the same question to both of you. Start with you, Anastasia, to give us an assessment of the election result and the significance of the past party's victory.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everyone for joining this event. I have to say I have also been relieved and also positively surprised of the results of these elections. I think until the last minute, we really did not know how the elections are going to go. And maybe I'll briefly start why these elections are so important. I mean, every past election in Moldova has been a crucial election in a way, but I think in this case, the stakes were very high. First of all, in the last couple of years, Moldova has managed to decouple from Russian influence. And these elections were kind of maybe one of the last chances for Russia to keep its grip on Moldova and on Moldovan democracy. For Russia, fragile institutions, lack of proper leadership, or like good direction, and also a kleptocratic or corrupt system also serves its interest in the Russian playbook. And Moldova is also a key country for Russia to influence Ukraine. So for Russia, these elections were important because they realized the stakes are very high, and therefore there was such a high investment from Russian side in terms of interferences on all the fronts. We have seen cyber threats, we have seen attacks on institutions, we have seen disinformation, deep fakes, church involvement, you name it, like everything what comes from the disinformation or like hybrid threat playbook was there, economic coercion, energy, blackmailing. So very high stakes, a lot of interferences. On the other side, PAS has received a lot of EU support also, which was also seen by the visits from the EU, but as well from the EU member states. And also during the last 3 years and a half, Moldova has become an EU candidate country, and also last week just completed its screening process for the EU accession. I mean, Moldova remains coupled with Ukraine, and now I think the next step would be to overcome these blockages from Hungary to open the fundamentals cluster. But in a way, we have seen like how much this government has done also in terms of the reform process. But at the same time, the grievances, some of the grievances remained, some challenges remained untackled, especially in the economic area. So a lot of this has been instrumentalized by Russia. And I think like what the polls predicted a little bit was a very tight battle between PAS, the party that won in the end, and the patriotic bloc. But what was interesting also to me that between 30 and 40% of people were undecided for these elections. So in a way, until last day, until basically yesterday evening, we did not really know how the results will look like. And I have to say, I was really positively surprised on how the elections went. And also, besides the fact that party got 50.2% of votes, what's interesting, we had a new party joining the parliament, or it's called the Democracy at Home Party, and this party was not polling high. And this party is linked very much with I think Ionela can also speak more here, but it's linked with the Romanian Hour and was supported by this Romanian far-right group. And the leader of this party is also allegedly has links to Plahotniuc and to the Russian FSB. So we also got a new spoiler party, I would say, entering the parliament. But coming back to these results, and just to sum it up, I think it showed also that in the end, it was also a geopolitical vote. People voted for PAS also to vote for the EU accession and for the EU reform process, EU-related reforms. And I think that also did not look anymore like a celebration, but it was a battle. It's the real war where Russia went full in, real hybrid war. And in a way, the message was to defend, like voting for PAS was also to defend democracy. I think also Russia has been too open in its tools to try to buy votes and to interfere in elections. And I think they also played the role, this like embedded corruption associated with the Russian playbook. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Anastasia. This was a really good, I think, overview. So I want to pass the floor straight to you, Ionela. Maybe you can also add what this actually means for Ukraine, because obviously if the result had gone the other way, it would have probably had a major negative impact, but also for the EU.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy for Moldova for succeeding, and for Moldovans, especially for succeeding to fight against this massive Russian disinformation and FIMI campaigns, which they were facing already for, we can say, already 4 years now. And I see what happened, and it's still happening in Moldova, and unfortunately will continue to happen, that we have this hybrid warfare, the Russian hybrid warfare against Moldova, and it's this scenario, David against Goliath. And this is one of those symbols that can explain very much how the Moldovans succeeded to keep their direction on the pro-European course. It's a win. It's a win for the pro-European forces. It's a win also for the European Union, because we can have a continuation of the pro-European integration process in Moldova. We will have a majority of pro-European seats in the Moldovan parliament, because PAS won 50% of the votes, and that will mean around 55 seats in the parliament, if I'm not mistaken, 55 out of 101 seats in the parliament. So they will have a majority, but it's still a weak majority, so they will still need to have to try to gain support on legislation from time to time from other parties. But the idea is that we will continue to have a pro-European government, and we'll probably continue with the European integration of Moldova. My fear was that we might have a Georgia scenario in which the parliamentary elections will basically conduct to a pro-Russian or pro-oligarchic majority that will freeze the European integration of the country, which will not happen. So this is the biggest win for the European Union. The biggest win for Ukraine is the fact that we have a pro-European continuation in the foreign policy of Moldova, because we know that PAS is traditionally pro-Ukraine and also party, that they will continue to support Ukraine, that they will have good neighboring relations. And this is very important for Ukraine, because they want to make sure that they have a stable and security at their southwestern border, that will not have any potential tensions in Transnistria that might come from Chisinau. And I believe that these are elements that are very important because we see the continuation of a stable leadership in Chisinau, and in this very uncertain security situation, it's crucial. When going back a bit on the election side, Anastasia gave a really great understanding of what happens there. But I would also would like to add the fact that with this new party, Democracy at Home, basically also Moldova joins the trend that it's already happening in Europe, that we have parties which are mostly promoted on TikTok, on social media. So we basically also have a change of how the electoral campaign processes are conducted, how parties are functioning nowadays, and the importance of social media in basically gaining electorates. This is probably a phenomenon which the social scientists in the future will try to analyze more, because it will be a really interesting case study, apart from also what we had last year in Romania with the unexpected candidate Călin Georgescu. But what we see is that the tendency to build this sovereignist, anti-European movements on TikTok, it's also something that's spreading to Moldova as well. Of course, the elections in Moldova were, as Anastasia mentioned, were conducted in a very critical period for Moldova. There were a lot of Russian hybrid campaigns. There were a lot of networks of vote buying. There was also this network of Orthodox priests connected to the Russian Orthodox Church, which somehow tried to influence the public perception towards the European Union. There was these messages that voting for PAS was meant that you are voting for also the pro-European candidate, and the EU, it's basically not the best promoter of the Moldovans' tradition or values, which are only promoted by the other parties or candidates. This is how the message was constructed, because the European Union promotes LGBT rights, promotes progressism, and all these types of disinformation campaigns, which were constructed by Kremlin. We already are very familiar with them, but apparently they are functioning since they are still instrumentalized. On top of that, what was also important to mention, that there were several bomb alerts yesterday, both in Moldova, but also across the diaspora, even in Belgium, in Brussels. One of the voting stations had this issue. But what we see comparing to the elections that Moldova had last year for both the presidential election, but also for the referendum, is that the Moldovan authorities were better prepared this time to face with all these threats that might come from Russia.
Thank you, Ionela. I agree that there were many lessons learned from the previous elections. So maybe just coming back to you, Anastasia, Ionela mentioned about the large-scale Russian disinformation that we're quite used to these days. So to what extent do you think the pushback against this disinformation was successful in achieving this result? I mean, how was it actually done? Because the Russians have been hammering Moldova ahead of this election for many weeks, if not months. So what were the key tools that were used to actually debunk Russian disinformation? That would be the first part of my question. And the second question is more about the sort of divisions in the country, because in the previous election we could see a lot of political divisions across the country. Is this lesser the case now? Have some of these political divisions been bridged? And if so, how have they actually been so bridged, or is that just a delusion on my side?
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. So I think indeed what we have seen in this elections, that there are, I believe there are a lot of lessons learned to learn from these elections. First of all, I think the Moldovan government, I have to give them credit. I think they did really a good job in what has happened. So it's not only disinformation, but it's really attacks on all the levels. For instance, only yesterday there were also again renewed cyber attacks, including on some media websites from Moldova. Overall, this year, Moldova has seen in the first half a year more cyber attacks than it has seen in the past 3 years together. So what has been done is also, I mean, and this takes time, I think, especially with cyber, for instance, but more resources and attention went into strengthening the resilience of institutions against cyber threats, and also into early cyber threat detection. Then I think what this government did well is really, I think they managed to kind of stay one step ahead. You know, for example, for today, there was a demonstration planned by the opposition bloc, Patriotic Bloc, and the idea of this demonstration was also to question the results of the elections. I think they expected to come quite closer with PAS, and to say that the votes have been bought. And this has been also, this was the campaign that the past rigged elections and also rigged the votes in diaspora, and a lot of votes were bought for money. But I think what the government did in a way well, they also communicated before that this will be envisaged, this will happen. And already on Saturday, they arrested 2 people that were supposed to be inciting for during the demonstration to have kind of disorder and to have escalations of the demonstrations. So I think this was one good measure to really communicate in advance, including, about these people that have been trained in Serbia, also to incite for basically during demonstrations to how to defend against the police as well, and how to make the demonstration escalate. And I think in a way, there was a good campaign about this. Then another, I think what was done well and also maybe played smartly, I have to say, is the fact that the Plahotniuc was just a couple of days, brought back, extradited to Moldova. And I think that also, I believe maybe that also brought for some people who were undecided the sentiment, like remembering the times of kleptocracy and corruption under the Democrat Party and under Plahotniuc, which officially was pro-European. So I also think that kind of was a clever move, if I have to say so, because in a way, we also have seen other parties now, the more pro-Russian parties, trying to corrupt electorate. And, it's nothing new for Moldova. Moldova has been living under a corrupt regime for years and years. And I think there is some kind of corruption fatigue that also maybe played a role in people still voting for PAS rather than, for instance, for the Patriotic Bloc. So I think that was also maybe like a success in defending the campaigns. Then, of course, there were a lot of campaigns to raise awareness about disinformation. I think it's hard to measure to which extent they worked, because they also, as Ionela mentioned, like TikTok was a big part of it. And for instance, the Moldovan Prime Minister, Dorin Recean, has mentioned just last week that around 100,000 accounts, there were 100 false accounts, 100,000 fake accounts on TikTok, and 250,000 spam accounts on TikTok being banned. And TikTok, also yesterday at the press conference, the government has mentioned that TikTok has been cooperative, at least, with the government, while that was not the case for Telegram. A lot of disinformation has been spread on Telegram. And I think this will also, unfortunately, continue. I think what was also, in a way, played a good role is the fact that international media has covered elections and has also wrote about the disinformation network. So it has really been like Moldova has been watched, like by EU partners, by the member states. So in a way, this narrative that was there last year that no one wants Moldova in the EU was not so popular anymore. I think now it was more the narrative that this is a dictatorship, or like Moldova is controlled by the EU. I mean, we've seen the statement last week from the Russian security services saying that the EU wants to control Moldova and NATO would send troops to Odessa, right? Which came in response to Maya Sandu's statement. So I honestly think Russia did everything they could. And they tried really hard to win these elections. To me, this result shows the good communication from the government, but also in a way I think people also made a strategic decision, some of them also to show up and vote. I did not expect such a high mobilization in diaspora for parliament elections. It's the highest ever. I mean, it's lower than in the second round for presidential elections, but considering that for parliamentary elections, people usually vote in lower percentage, this was a very high turnout. I think it's 17.5 percentage from all the people are from diaspora. So I think this also has played a role, and as well uncovering the sophisticated schemes. I think independent media in Moldova did a good job in addressing the issue of disinformation. And then as well, like the fact that people started getting fines for illicit, for getting money for election. And I think this has been very much visualized as well and promoted in media. So maybe that also in a way discouraged people to cooperate in mass with the pro-Russian groups. And then about the divisions in the country, what we know is that the main grievances in Moldova are economic. So when we look at the polls, it's really low salaries, corruption, unemployment, high prices. All of this play a high role for Moldovan population. And I always ask myself the question, to which extent Moldova is really polarized. I think there are divergences in population for sure, but to which extent this is being further amplified and fueled by the Russian disinformation? Because particularly these groups particularly target the socially vulnerable population, and we can see how people voted. I mean, mostly people voted for the patriotic bloc in the very north of Moldova, on the basically peripheries of the country, and in very south of Moldova, including Gagauzia. It's interesting that even in Transnistria, the Transnistrian region, 30% of people voted for PAS, which I think is quite a lot. One would, especially, I think that's young people. I haven't looked yet at the whole disaggregation of data, but I would guess so. But I think coming back to the division, I also think this new government will have to work harder on, like bringing everyone on board for the EU accession. And it's not necessary that people, I think a lot of people have this deeper fears, like of the war spilling over in Moldova, of being dragged into something they don't want and don't understand. So I think sometimes this is, and here the pro-Russian parties have done, if I can say so, a better job on saying what EU, on spreading false information about the EU. And a lot of people, I believe, have to understand, or will need to understand better, maybe, or the government will have to work better on what EU really is and what the EU is not. Because I think this kind of divisions are very much created, they're further polarized. If you speak to people, I was in Gagauzia last year, it's not necessarily they're pro-Russian, some of them. I think there are just a lot of grievances that have been not addressed, and they don't feel on board with where the country is going on.
Thank you, Anastasia. I agree with you that there's an ongoing need to better engage with different parts of the population vis-a-vis what the EU is, what it stands for and whatnot. But as we know, that's not something that's simple or can be done overnight. So it has to be like a long-term engagement. But I want to come back to you now, Ionela, because we touched on Russia a few times, but obviously the result must be a huge loss for the Kremlin. They must be feeling, rather devastated about this, which makes us all feel feel even happier about the result, to be honest. But we also know that the Russians aren't just going to say, oh, well, hey, yeah, we lost this time. That's it. We're not going to bother with Moldova anymore. Let's just give up. That's not what they do. They generally dig in and double down. So how do you view the next steps that we could expect from Russia?
Yes, you are right, Amanda, that we shouldn't believe that now Kremlin will give up on trying to take control over Moldova. What we can expect is that since we'll have, let's say, three parties, political groups in the parliament, that 3 out of 4, because I'm not very convinced that the fourth one, if it's pro-Russian or more, very confused, that they will try to instrumentalize this and create a lot of social tensions. They will also try to play on the vulnerabilities of the European integration. A lot of people voted with the hopes that we'll have European integration as fast as possible. As Anastasia mentioned, Moldova just wrapped up the screening process for starting the accession negotiations. And as we know, those accession negotiations will start with the negotiations on chapters, when all the member states will agree with opening the first cluster of accession, which is called the cluster of fundamentals, which basically deals with security, human rights, rule of law, judicial system. And this is the first cluster which is opened, but also the cluster which is closed, the last one. So it's the most important one. But before going into the technical negotiations, we have to have the agreement of the member states, EU member states, on starting the accession process. And we know that Moldova is coupled with Ukraine in basically opening the negotiations on clusters. So since we are not sure if Ukraine is at the same stage of European integration as Moldova, probably will not have yet the start of the negotiation on clusters. So we might expect that Russia or Kremlin will try to construct some narratives around this in order to create tensions either against Ukraine in Moldova, to create frustrations among the Moldovians about the fact that they have to wait for the Ukrainians in order to start with the integration process. They will try to create this tension, but also they will try to create anti-European feelings because as many people in Moldova voted, they voted to move faster with the European integration. And this was a great card which past played, but at the same time, when the integration process will become slower, because it's a very difficult process with a lot of technicalities and a lot of political discussions and negotiations that can also be played by the Russians against Moldova. So the authorities in Chisinau will have to take into account these possible narratives and prepare how to counteract it. Also, Brussels will have to be better at explaining how the European integration process works and to start to show the benefits of the European process even sooner. This principle of more to more, receiving more funds or being integrated gradually within the European Union should continue. And when we are speaking about that, we have this growth plan. We have basically that 1.9 billion of euros fund that the European Union is providing to Moldova. It was a great idea to start providing and since April, when it was launched, until now, Moldova received around 300 millions of euros. So this pre-accession funds. This was a good move because, as Anastasia mentioned, for the majority of the Moldovans, the European Union is associated with a better lifestyle, with social welfare, with support, and we have to continue, and the Europeans, by we, I refer to the European Union, we have to continue supporting Moldovan, especially since we are now turning into the winter, and we know that Moldova is still facing some energy security issues. So on one side, we'll have to continue with the European integration, and the member states will have to find a way how to move forward with opening the first cluster of accessions, and we have to continue also putting pressure on Chișinău to move forward with those reforms that are vital for the European Union. The judicial reform, the public administration reform, the fight against oligarchy. So all those criteria that are crucial for the European integration, we should put pressure on that, but also provide technical support for Chișinău to basically be able to integrate all the European acquis communautaire. So on that, and what other elements? Of course, depending on how the war in Ukraine will evolve and how the peace negotiation for Ukraine will evolve, also the Russians will try to instrumentalize that in order to create more tension also in Moldova. One of the key messages during the hybrid warfare campaign, this disinformation manipulation campaign, was this idea that the war in Ukraine was utilized to exploit the Moldovans' fear. And basically, the Russian narrative was falsely claiming that the EU accession process will drag Moldova into the war in Ukraine, and which also created some sort of tensions among the Moldovan society. And we saw that the pro-Russian party basically used the concept of neutrality as a way to gain votes within this election. So this happened. The European Union have to take into account this narrative and to basically try to support more also the EU civilian mission that we have in Moldova, which, if I'm not mistaken, it's renewed up to next year. Maybe we'll have to renew for again for 2 years this EU civilian mission that helps with the border patrol and internal security in Moldova, that also helps with cybersecurity.
Thank you, Ionela. I want to stay on the issue of the EU accession, but just to take a quick pause, because I want to remind the audience that they can put their questions in the box or by clicking on the hand sign. Please don't be shy. Nobody wants to spend the whole session just listening to my questions. We want to hear other questions as well. But coming to you, Anastasia, because Ionela is correct when she mentioned that the EU accession, I mean the opening of the fundamentals chapter for Ukraine is blocked by Hungary, and this means basically that they have decided they don't want to decouple Moldova from Ukraine. So my first question to you, Anastasia, would be, do you think that's the right policy? Should Moldova be decoupled if they can't find a solution to Hungary? And what would your solution be for Hungary?
If I would have a solution, probably, I would not be like sitting here now. But I think to the question of decoupling, I think it is in a way quite a polarizing question. If you talk to different experts, the Moldovan official position is that they understand the coupling with Ukraine. And I mean, I also personally think it's a right choice to stay at the moment for opening at least the clusters coupled with Ukraine. I think Moldova could decouple at a later stage once the clusters are open. I think you will have experts who have different opinions on this topic. But I think, and I just name a few arguments why. I think first of all, like there is a clear understanding that Moldova also has this candidate status, and it is pursuing the EU accession process because Ukraine is defending Moldova as well. So there is this strong security reason there. And if not for geopolitical reasons, maybe that would have taken some years for this renewed enlargement, or maybe it would have even not been there. So I think the people also in Moldova and the government understands this. I think another issue is, of course, the relations with Ukraine. I think for Moldova, it's really crucial to keep good, friendly and partnership relations with Ukraine. We have seen also today that the Ukrainian government and the President Zelensky congratulated us with its victory during for these elections. For Ukraine, it's also very important to have a stable and secure Moldova. And for Moldova, you know, it's important that Ukraine is fighting Russia and pushing it back. And on the other hand, for me, the question would be like, if let's imagine we would decouple them. I also can imagine internally in the EU, there can be a case of cross-vetoing Moldova, even if now there is a full support for Moldova's EU accession, including from Hungary. I am not sure, you know, that would be the case when Moldova would go alone without Ukraine in the EU accession process. But that's not to say, I mean, we know it's a merit-based process. So I think at one point, of course, they will have to decouple. Also, Moldova is a much smaller country than Ukraine. I think we have also very different challenges. For me, the question will also be in general for the EU. I think we need to prepare and have this conversation. How do we want this enlargement to take place, considering that Ukraine also does not have full control of its territory at the moment, how this enlargement can go forward, how can we transpose the laws, you know, like I think a lot of these things have to be already discussed now. And another, I think, challenge that we see, it's also the discussion about EU enlargement inside the EU. We have now, Moldova has a new government, let's say they move forward with the reform process, but then are we ready inside the EU? You know, how this new enlargement will work? Will we have a new treaty? Will we use the Passerella clause? I think there are a lot of discussions, but if you look at the countries, I mean, I am based in Berlin, we don't have this real discussion about EU enlargement. So I think we already have to start preparing the population for this question, because when it comes, you know, like we have to be ready to pass it through the parliaments or through the referendum in the countries. And I don't see us being there. I also think that, well, fingers crossed. I mean, there are a lot of challenges in Moldova, but I think also in a way Moldova can move quite quickly. And also Ukraine, we have seen how quickly they've been moving with the screening process. So I think now, in a way, also the ball is in the EU court. I mean, it's on the both sides because they do have to deliver on the reform, but at the same time, we have to prepare that this enlargement really takes place. And as Ionela also mentioned, that's a matter of EU's credibility, also EU credibility as a geopolitical actor, and also the EU credibility in the region. And I think also we don't have to talk about the Western Balkans, but I think we know what happens when this accession process doesn't go anywhere, right? Like on the enlargement process. And I think now I would also argue, maybe it's my bias, but I think the stakes are also much higher now because you have Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine, which is a new candidate. But I think for the bypassing, I've also seen today this proposal from Costa to bypass the Orban's veto. You know, I think the solution have been discussed before, kind of, so that without having the official agreement on opening the cluster, that the countries would move forward, you know, with the implementation of the roadmap process. However, in the end, you will still need a vote for closing each of the chapters. But in a way, I have heard these ideas before, especially from the Ukrainian side. And I think we need to have some kind of unblockage. You know, we can't wait also for the Hungarian elections in the hope that something happens. I mean, we can't have every time a discussion about who's going to block Ukraine or Moldova along the way. And my question will be, if ever, you know, now it's Hungary, but maybe also you have other countries that are just also hiding behind Hungary and are not really open for the EU enlargement. So, and of course, in the longer run, I think we always come back to the QMV and the discussion on QMV. But I think for the next step, it would be really important to unblock these negotiations. I mean, I don't know if I have really. I think what is now like this proposal for the clusters, you know, to be open with the qualified majority, kind of, to move forward and bypass Hungary from Costa. I think that would be already a significant step forward if that takes place. But I think also we know we have so many instances where individual member states can block it, that I think we have to discuss also fundamentally what this enlargement means for the EU.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because continuing in the way that we have been for the last few months with blockages is very similar to what has happened over the last nearly 2 decades in the Western Balkans. In the new geopolitical imperative for enlargement was supposed to take the EU to a completely different understanding of what the stakes are here. And okay, we can say it's just one member state, but as you mentioned, there's probably 2 or 3 other ones behind who are not that disappointed that Hungary is blocking. So there needs to be a completely different way of looking at things because the stakes are incredibly high here. So I do hope that they manage to find a way forward before the Hungarian elections, because that's also not necessarily going to be a result that will bring about a deblocking anyway, because we simply don't know. But maybe that's a topic for a different webinar. I want to come briefly back to you, Ionela, and then I'm going to take the questions that are in the Q&A box, because you mentioned before the issue of gradual integration as a sort of, I would say it's a parallel process to the actual integration process. I mean, could you give us a couple of examples where this could happen rather quickly for Moldova and for Ukraine for that case?
Yeah, so because we, as Anastasia very clearly pointed out, we are still in this very blocked period within the European decision-making thinking on how to move forward with the European enlargement process. One of the ideas is that up to the point when we'll have the qualified majority voting, which will give us the opportunity to give the EU the opportunity to move forward with taking faster and to streamline its foreign policy decision making, we are still blocked by the vetoing of some countries. And the alternative, it's how to have these creative, innovative ideas of moving forward even within the current treaties limit. And one of these ideas is this gradual integration. So basically, the Ukraine and Moldova were somehow integrated within the European Union, because even before becoming candidate countries, they were part of the Eastern Partnership, which was another mechanism of the European Union. They have an associated agreement with the EU, which basically covered the political cooperation. We have a deep and comprehensive free trade area agreement, which basically means that both the Ukrainian economy and Moldovan economy are adapting to the single market, so they are starting to become more integrated. So we have this gradual integration, these examples of gradual integration on the political and economic side already also happening before them becoming candidate countries, and these processes are starting to be accelerated nowadays. And then the other idea is that we are seeing that they received the visa free entrance to the European space. Now they are part of the roaming. Moldova is part of the roaming area since this year, and also from October, so from next week, Moldova will also be part of this SEPA payments, basically meaning that the businesses or Moldovan citizens will pay less transaction costs because the Moldovan banks will be more integrated with the European banking system. So we have these very concrete, practical ideas when we are speaking about this very confusing concept of gradual integration, but these are bringing concrete results and benefits for the citizens' everyday life. Of course, what can we do more in the future? And what's happening right now, since the war in Ukraine and the pressure that Russia is putting on Moldova, we are starting to see the Moldovan energy infrastructure becoming more interconnected with the Romanian and the European one. So we also have to, we are kind of seeing this energy security of Moldova being more integrated in the European one. Now, before the war, Moldova was 100% dependent on the Russian gas and electricity. Since 2023, that 30% of Russian gas, which Moldova was using for its national consumption, it's coming from European sources. And in terms of electricity, they were taking electricity from the power plant in Transnistria, and due to the 2025, so basically in January this year, there was an energy crisis because Russians cannot provide any more gas to Transnistria through Ukraine, since Ukraine has closed that pipeline. So that power plant, which was producing electricity using the Russian gas, couldn't function anymore. So we have now new initiatives from the EU side to diversify the energy sources for Moldova. We have also a strategy in order to build the energetic independence and resilience of Moldova. We have, and if I'm not mistaken, there will be an electricity interconnector between Romania and Moldova, which is currently constructed between Isaceea and let me look at my notes, because I don't recall the name of these small villages. So it's Isaceea, Vulcanești, and Chișinău. And then there are two other projects in the making. One, it's the Suceava Bălți, which is another interconnector, and another one which will be financed by United States. It's a direct line between Romania and Republic of Moldova. It's the interconnector Strășești-Gutinaș. So basically we are seeing that we have concrete examples on how the European integration is helping Moldova to diversify its sources. And then there is also a dedicated fund from the European Union for Moldova to invest more in renewable energy sources and build its capacity. So gradual integration. Moldova will do more efforts and more reforms on a sector. European Union will provide more funds and will try to bring that sector of Moldova into the EU system better. So we are creating this interconnectiveness, which of course it's the concrete example of European integration in practice.
Thank you, Ionela, for sharing these concrete examples, which I think are very good. And it's also good to hear that the United States is still financing projects in the region. I want to come to you now, Anastasia, with a couple of these questions. The first two are from anonymous attendee. You mentioned that PAS has a majority, but it would still need to turn to other parties to seek support when passing legislation. Which one of these other parties could they potentially turn to? There's also a question about the possibility of a truly pro-European party emerging now to provide a genuine alternative for PAS for the next elections? Do you have an example of this? And then the last question from Katharina Wilrand for either one of you. Can you say something about the reactions from Gagauzia and Transnistria to the election results? I think many Transnistrians weren't able to vote at all because there was ongoing blockages as far as I know. But I give the floor back to you, Anastasia.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I think it's interesting question, Sol, and I've also been looking into it. For instance, for the another party emerging, I mean, I think there are already quite a few pro-EU parties in Moldova, which are genuinely pro-EU. But I think that maybe the issue was that they didn't manage to bring like a real agenda. You know, they campaigned of being pro-EU and better than PAS. That was their main message for many of them. But there was not like a real electoral program. And I think, like, I also hope that for next elections we will see more parties, you know, filling this gap. I think there are quite a few gaps on the political spectrum where you could have a new pro-EU party emerging. For instance, you know, also in Moldova, the parties that identify themselves with left and right, it's not like traditional European parties. It's very different. I mean, I think most parties have quite a mixed agenda. But for example, one could say you don't have a pro-EU party, which is more on the left, for example, you know, like that's not there. And then I think this Alternativa bloc tried to campaign as somehow centrist, but you know, even PAS, which is in the EPP family, and they are more on the right, they have a lot of social agenda in their party. So I think this is this heritage of the Soviet Union, that all the parties are somehow mixed, but have very strong, many of them, social policies. While the parties on the left, many of them are for more traditional values, anti-LGBT agenda, you know, so it's like very mixed. But I do definitely see not only the possibility, maybe I see the necessity also of working towards having more pro-European, genuinely pro-European parties, but also with a clear agenda. I mean, by the number of votes that these other pro-EU parties got, we can see that they didn't really have an alternative to offer. You know, it's not enough to say you're pro-EU, but what do you bring to the table? For me, the question would be. And then I think that's also linked a little bit like now what happens when they need to pass laws that require 2/3. So that is required for changing the constitution. And for some of the organic legislation, they would also require 2/3. For me, this will also be a test for parties that say that they are pro-EU, how much pro-EU they are, like Alternativa bloc and Pociumban's party, MAN. You know, they claim to be running with a pro-EU agenda, so there we can really see. I also can imagine for some of the EU accession-related legislation, they could find this majority when needed, and including also Renato Usate. You know, I can also imagine working with him on some of the legislation. Definitely not with the patriotic bloc. I think they will block everything. And now this party, which is Democracy at Home, about which both Ionela and I have talked, they are now, like, I don't know, I can say it's like an unknown, like a black swan coming, because they last year officially they campaigned for the EU accession, but you know, there are also links between them and Kostyuk. They had attending a meeting in Russia and also having some links with the FSB agents from Russia, but he denied it. I think this will very much, they're also voting trends will expose it. I mean, I can also answer the next question, but maybe I leave it to you, Ionela, with Gagauzia and Transnistria.
Okay, that would be fine. Ionela, you have 4 minutes to answer that. It's quite a big question, but the microphone's yours.
Okay, thank you very much. So when it comes to how the people from Gagauzia voted, the majority of them voted for in 82% of the votes went to the patriotic bloc, so you know the communist, socialist bloc. Then we had this alternative group which received 11% of the votes, and PAS received only around 3% of the votes. So we see that this is Gagauzia, it's a Russian stronghold. And the fact that in Gagauzia we have also this sometimes ethnic differentiations can also create political preferences from for specific countries, for specific candidates, but also it's also about the sources of information that the citizens in Gagauzia region have access to, because they are consuming Russian media, they are speaking in Russian, so somehow they are in this Russian bubble. Well, what I found more interesting, and Gagauzia was expected to be this way. What I found really interesting, it's Transnistria, because also as Anastasia mentioned, in Transnistria we had the patriotic group bloc which won 61% of the votes, but PAS won 30% of the votes. So we see also a trend in the population in feeling that the current way how Transnistria is run by the separatists, it's not functioning anymore. They cannot provide any more social benefits or qualitative lifestyle for the populations. People are becoming poorer and poorer. The free gas from Russia and the money that was coming from Russia, it's running out. So they are losing one of their main revenues, economic revenues. At the same time, they're also interacting with people from the other side of the Dnieper region, and they're seeing Dnieper river, and they are seeing that Moldovans, due to the European integration, they're benefiting from concrete examples of how their life is becoming better. So there is also this tendency, and I recently read a poll that 45% of the Transnistrian people are in favor of the reunification with Moldova, and that we have also a trend in Transnistria that people are seeing to see that Russia it's not providing any more benefits for them, so maybe they should fully reintegrate with Moldova. And I believe that in the future this might create more opportunities for Chisinau for the reintegration process of Transnistria, because we have to keep in mind that before having the full integration, the European Union, the Transnistrian separatist region will have to be integrated in order to solve these issues. And the fact that the European Union provides economic benefits for Moldova will be one of that soft power instruments that will attract definitely also the people from Transnistria.
Thank you, Ionela, and I think this is a very positive note to actually finish the webinar on. And as we probably all know, I mean, Transnistrians have been benefiting from the DCFTA that they had from the EU for several years now. So I think it's a positive way to end. It would be great to see the reintegration of Transnistria. So I'd like to thank both of you very much for coming and sharing your really brilliant insights on the elections in Moldova and what we can expect from different parties going ahead. You certainly showcased your wealth of knowledge and experience, and I'm very grateful to both of you for giving us your time this afternoon. For the guests out there, we will be looking into another election in the very near future, because Georgia has its local elections coming up this weekend, which are sure to be an exciting is one word to describe it, although maybe some of us could think of another word. But we will be having a post-election event next week on the Georgian election, so please do check the website for news of that. Have a good afternoon, and thank everybody very much for joining us here today.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.